Listen. Short story long.
Welcome.
It could take your whole life.
Preach.
Develop clarity.
Second, patience.
If it scared you, you should probably do it.
Whatever you think you don't have, you have something else in its place.
Listen. Short story long.
Go, Woody, go.
Preach.
Listen.
Welcome.
Dr. Raymond, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for doing it. I am very, very excited to chat with you. So thanks for taking the time. Thanks for making this happen.
Well, you're welcome. Anything I can do to spread the message of brain health, I get excited to do.
Yes, yes. So I originally came across your work from your TED Talk. And I think the title was What I Learned from 10,000 Brain Scans. And I thought, this is interesting. And I'm fascinated by brain stuff. And I've read some V.S. Ramachandran and a little bit of everything. And when I watched that talk, I was like, gosh, this is really interesting. And so I bought the books. I bought Change Your Brain, Change Your Life and The Brain Warrior's Way. And the first one I read was Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. And I was like dumbfounded. I mean, I feel like there's kind of these moments that happen to me when I'm searching for information where it's like I just came across something that I can't believe everyone doesn't know. Does that make sense?
Everyone should know this.
Yeah.
They should teach it in second grade.
Yes. So that's how it felt. And it just felt like, oh my gosh, this is so, like, it makes so much sense. It's so clear. And I just felt like I don't know. It's rare that I feel like I grab some information that feels so special and like everyone should know it. So I instantly did everything I could to track you down and came and did a brain scan and did the whole thing. But the thing that really got my attention, or what you see when you read the book and watch the talks, is all of these scans of brains. Can you explain to the listener who's maybe not familiar with it what those scans are and what you're doing that's far beyond just the regular sort of psychiatric or therapeutic or that sort of world?
So since we have time, can I just give them a little bit of a history?
Well, yeah.
So when I was 18, Vietnam was still going on, and I had a really low draft number and ended up as an infantry medic where my love of medicine was born. But after about a year, I realized I didn't like being shot at or sleeping in the mud, so I got retrained as an X-ray technician. That was really important because our professors used to say, how do you know unless you look? And when I was a second-year medical student in 1979, someone I loved tried to kill herself. And I took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist, and I came to realize if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her, that it would help me. And ultimately, it would help her children and even her grandchildren as they would be shaped by someone who was happier and more stable. So I fell in love with psychiatry because I realized it could change generations of people. And I've loved it every day for 40 years. But I fell in love with the only medical specialty that never looks at the organ it treats. And I thought, that's crazy. And so I started agitating my professors where I did my psychiatric training. Why aren't we looking? We should look. Of course we should look. The brain is our organ. I mean, it's not your foot that's causing these emotional problems. And in the late 80s and early 90s, I got the opportunity to look. And the study you had is one called SPECT, S-P-E-C-T. It stands for Single Photon Emission Computed Tomography. It's basically a 3D look at blood flow and activity in your brain. And from the moment I ordered my first scan, I got hooked because I realized you can tell me the story of your life. And that's how most people are diagnosed with depression or ADD or bipolar disorder or an addiction, is you tell them what's going on and they give you a diagnosis, and then they start treating you without any biological information, which I just thought was insane. And I'm a psychiatrist. I can diagnose insane. That's insane. And so I started doing SPECT, and got no end of grief from my colleagues about it. It's like, it's not part of our training. It's not part of our tradition. You're outside of the box. You shouldn't be outside of the box. And I'm not sort of an outside of the box person. I'm one of 7 children. I like it when we get along. But I don't like it if I don't have all the information. And over the last nearly 30 years, we built this database of 150,000 scans on people from 121 countries. So when I looked at your scan, it wasn't based on 30 that I'd seen. It was based on literally tens of thousands of scans. And I got so excited because it helped me be a better doctor. Yep. It caused me to fall in love with my brain. In fact, if you date any of my children, I'm going to scan you.
I love that.
And when I met my wife, she's my second wife, and I'm like, if I ever get married again, her naked brain is more important than any other naked part of her. Yes. And so 2.5 weeks after I met her, I scanned her. Yeah. And it changed everything in my life, from how I eat to how much I sleep to the habits and hobbies I would engage in. Yeah. It's brain-centric, because when my brain is right, I make better decisions. I'm a better husband. I'm a better doctor. I'm a better business person. I'm a better writer. I'm a better dad. I'm a better grandfather. I'm just better. And people don't get that, right? Nobody loves their brain. In 1991, when I started doing SPECT, I didn't love mine, which is crazy, because I was the top neuroscience student where I went to medical school. I was a double board certified psychiatrist, physician, and I just don't care one bit about my own brain until I saw it. And then I'm like, well, that's not good. And I developed this concept I call brain envy. Freud was wrong. He was about 3 feet too low in the body. Yes. It's your brain that you need to get obsessed about. And it just literally changed the trajectory of my life.
Yeah. Okay, so my first question is, what were SPECT scans used for, or what are they used for other than this?
So SPECT was actually developed in the 1980s, and in every major hospital in the world, they have SPECT cameras. SPECT heart studies, SPECT bone studies, SPECT lung studies, and they were starting to do it for brain, for head trauma, for dementia, for seizures and strokes. And so when I first got into it, nuclear medicine, it's a nuclear medicine study, the chief of medicine at my hospital said, this is a tool to give psychiatrists more information to help your patients. And I just completely got it.
And what blows my mind is why, like, it feels to me like the moment you started using it for these other purposes, everyone would be like, oh yeah, we should do that too. And it would just instantly become the norm. Like, why do you think that we don't think of our brains that way as an organ? We don't think of everything that shapes our behavior and the way that we treat people and the way that we are out in the world is dictated by the health of this organ, and therefore looking at it would be the obvious thing. Like, why do you think there's that disconnect?
And it should have been. And in the early 90s, there was a lot of excitement about imaging in psychiatry. But the problem was the diagnostic Bible in psychiatry, or for mental health, is called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So this is something that has evolved over time that basically psychiatrists voted on. It's like, if you have 6 of these 9 criteria, you have depression. And so they would take 100 people who were depressed and go, what's the SPECT pattern for depression? And when they didn't find one, they basically threw out imaging when they should have thrown the diagnostic Bible out, because depression is sort of like chest pain, right? Nobody gets a diagnosis of chest pain because it doesn't tell you what's causing it or what to do for it. You know, there are 100 different causes of chest pain. You can have coronary artery disease, you can have a heart arrhythmia, you can have a heart infection, you can have grief, you can have anxiety. There's a whole bunch of causes of chest pain. And depression's exactly the same thing. You know, you can have low activity in the brain, and that can cause you to be depressed. You can have high activity, and that can cause you to be depressed. You can have a toxic or traumatic brain. that can cause you to be depressed. But because it didn't go with the standard, it got thrown to the wayside, except for me and a couple of other troublemakers who went, if you don't look, you don't know, stop line.
Yeah. Gosh, thank God. It just, it blows my mind. So now is it much more, do you have a much easier time talking about this stuff, or do you still get a lot of resistance?
I get a lot of resistance from my standard colleagues.
Yep.
I get a lot of praise from the out-of-the-box colleagues. And it's really, if you want to be happy, find a community where you belong. Yeah. So if I go to the American Psychiatric Association's annual meetings, I don't belong because I don't fit in the box. But if I go, I just gave a huge keynote lecture at the Integrative Medicine for Mental Health meeting, and I got a standing ovation. So one, they want to arrest me. The other, they want to give me the Nobel Prize. So it sort of keeps me balanced.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I want to talk about my scan real quick. Like I said, I came across all this stuff. The reason that it hits my radar so heavy is because when I was 18 years old, I had a traumatic brain injury. I had a skateboard accident, fell, fractured skull, severe brain bleeding, multiple concussions, was in a coma for 4 days, and essentially woke up and it was like my brain rebooted. I couldn't taste food. I couldn't read. I had to kind of slowly relearn all of those things. And shortly after, 6 months later, I was finally cleared to move to Los Angeles. That was my dream, so I couldn't wait to get out of there. I left and never really had another scan, never had another CAT scan, never had anything. And it was always just kind of this thing that I knew was in the back of, back there, but hoped never came up. So when I read this stuff, I thought, man, this is awesome. And obviously I feel good and everything feels okay, but this seemed perfect. If I could just figure out how to get one of these scans, that would tell me how my general activity is and that stuff. So that being said, I came in, we did a scan. It was an incredibly easy process, not scary like those CAT scans used to be. I remember when I was 18 being scared to death of those CAT scan machines. Super easy. And we got my scan here, and you can see, luckily, thank God, it looks like I avoided any major issues, but you can see where the brain injury was.
Yeah, so if you put the scan up on the screen so that we can see it, what we're looking at is the outside surface of the brain. And in a healthy scan, full, even, symmetrical activity. In your scan, if we look at the top left image, go down about 40% of the way over to the right, you can see there's a hole there. Your left temporal lobe, which is underneath your temple and behind your eye, is just clearly hurt.
Yeah.
And the exciting news is it can be better, but if you don't know that, sometimes it can go with memory issues or finding words or irritability, and some people can go with dark thoughts, and you want to know that because that's a vulnerability you have and why you probably shouldn't really drink, because when you drink, it'll make it worse and make you more vulnerable. So that was the first thing I saw. And then it's sort of a little bumpy. And I'm like, why is your brain bumpy? In a healthy scan, it's not bumpy. But your accident was pretty severe. In fact, if we look at the bottom right image, there we're looking down from the top. So the top is the front part, the bottom is the back part. And you can see it almost looks like a valley going down the right side. And that's probably, you probably hit your right side and it slammed the left side against your skull, which gave you this. It's possible it happened the other way, but it just that the top front right side of your brain sort of looks like it's squished in a little bit.
Yeah.
And we want to make it better. And the lucky thing for you is it can be better if we do the right things for it. And that's what I get excited about. It's actually not the first scan that I'm thrilled about. It's usually the second scan when you get obsessed with taking care of your brain.
Yeah.
And then I give you some nutrients, things like hyperbaric oxygen, that we really work on repairing it.
Yeah.
Just like you're an athlete, right? Because in many ways you are. As you perform, you're performing at a high level.
Yeah.
And business people are, in many ways, athletes, right?
Yeah.
If they want to perform at their high level, they have to take care of their brains.
Yeah. That's so cool. And for me, I think it was not only the initial, seeing that, everything was quote unquote okay, right? Nothing too crazy. And then, but seeing a picture of it gave me something to shoot for. You know what I mean? Because you showed me up against perfect scans and all the different variants, and it gave me sort of, like you said, brain envy. If I didn't have a goal image to look at and you just said, hey, you should take these supplements and stuff, and trust me, it'll feel better, I don't think I would have followed through the same way.
And that's one of the reasons I fell in love with imaging, because compliance went up.
Yeah, I bet.
So stigma went down
Yeah.
because people didn't feel so badly about having a problem.
Yeah.
It's a medical problem, not a moral problem.
Yeah.
And so stigma went down, compliance went up, which meant people got better. And, those of us that go into medicine, we do that because we like helping people, right?
Yeah.
We like that. When people get better, it feeds our soul.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if I have a tool that helps me get people better and you're telling me I shouldn't do it, I'm not likely to listen to you because it doesn't fit my goal of helping people get better.
Yeah, big time. So for everyone, the treatment is different, but the thing that, what'd you tell me to do? Supplements,
Supplements.
high fish oil, right?
High dose fish oil,
Yep.
a great multiple vitamin with high doses of B6, B12, and folate.
Yep.
And the reason for that, those three have been found to decrease the conversion of mild cognitive impairment, so my memory's no good, to Alzheimer's disease.
Yep.
So just those three nutrients alone.
Yep.
But we designed the multiple vitamin to really help. It's got 5 times the RDA for vitamin D, which is really important because 80% of the population is low in that. High dose fish oil, and then a brain boost that actually works in many different ways, because it's one of the things I learned why single ingredient things don't work is the brain doesn't get sick in one way. So it's not going to get well in one way. So there are things to increase blood flow, things to increase the neurotransmitter acetylcholine that helps with memory, antioxidant protection, and so on. So I'm thrilled. I use the cocktail I recommended for you. It's called Brain and Body Power Max in my NFL work. So we've scanned and treated 300 NFL players. Some really cool ones like Terry Bradshaw and Freddie Dryer. And 80% of our players just taking the supplements were better in 2 months.
Gosh.
So it doesn't take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, eating right, not putting yourself at risk for another head injury because your brain's already vulnerable. Hyperbaric oxygen is something I published on and found to be really helpful for my patients. And then basically we also went through your risk factors for trouble. Because, I learned a number of years ago, if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it if it's headed for the dark place, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. And we know what they are. I created a mnemonic called Bright Minds. So B is for blood flow, R is retirement and aging, I is inflammation, and so on. And so what are your risk factors?
Yeah.
And how are we going to attack each one of them? So D is diabetes, and your weight's fine, but 70% of the population is overweight or obese.
Yeah.
And I published 2 studies that shows your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down, which should scare the fat off anyway.
Yeah.
Right? And it's why I lost 30 pounds. When I figured that connection out, and I'd always had trouble because I have fat genes. I have a brother and a sister. They're both 150 pounds overweight.
Wow.
And I'm not.
Yeah.
Why? Because I don't give in to the behaviors making it likely to be so. And when I figured out that connection, I will never purposefully do something to shrink my brain.
Yeah. Gosh, it's so much more helpful when you look at it like that. The other thing too is because of my story, and well, let me ask you this too, because I want to put a button on that part, is what would you expect? Like, let's just say I've been following the supplements every single day, setting up the hyperbaric chamber. If I do all of that stuff, how long until you see a noticeable reaction on my scan?
2 months.
That's it?
I have
That's
some people
amazing.
scan the next day. I have a mixed martial artist scan, and it was terrible, and he was in trouble with the law and had suicidal thoughts, and his brain just looked terrible.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know these supplements work.
Yeah.
I just don't know how fast they work. Would you take them, and I'm going to scan you 2.5 hours later.
Yeah.
And we saw a dramatic improvement. Now, it wouldn't stick, right? I mean, you have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
But it meant his brain could respond. How exciting is that? To know that you can make your brain better the next hour by doing the right thing now.
Yeah. How much of it do you think is doing the right thing and how much of it is not doing the wrong thing for most people?
Well, I think it's both. So brain health is really 3 things. It's brain envy. You got to care about it. Avoid things that hurt your brain and do things that help it. And they're all equally important because you don't do the right thing because you should, because nobody will do that. You do the right thing because you love yourself. You love your wife. You love your kids. You love your mission. You love your money. Whatever it is you love, that's why you want a good brain. And then avoiding, and our society's not helping us. In my new book, The End of Mental Illness, that's coming out next year, there's a fun writing device where I say if I was an evil ruler and I wanted to create mental illness, how would I do that? And I basically create American society where kids are addicted to gadgets, Happy Meals. They're just not happy. They promote illness. When you look at, what's ever on a kid's menu, it's generally something that'll hurt them. The increased use of sodas and orange juice, and people go, juice, why are you picking on juice? Because it's unwrapped fruit sugar that turns toxic in your body. Then if you look at water pollution and air pollution and news pollution, all of those things are perpetuating mental illness. And now we've legalized marijuana for virtually anything you want. And I'm a fan of legalizing it, but it's not good for you. I mean, alcohol is legal. Is alcohol good? No, it's terrible. It increases your risk of 7 different kinds of cancer. And people who drink every day have smaller brains. And when it comes to your brain, I'm just sorry, size matters. It's the only organ in your body where size matters, and that's your brain. And so I published 2 studies, one on 1,000 pot smokers. Every area of their brain was lower.
Wow.
I'm not a fan.
It's interesting because everyone says, I'm not a big pot guy, but everyone says, oh, it's good, it's pretty much healthy.
And it's complete crap.
Yeah, it's good to hear because I feel like, I don't know. I mean, you look at it and it seems like, of course, there can't be no effect. There can't be nothing negative about this. That's too good to be true. So that narrative just can't be true. So to hear someone, I think, say clearly that it does have those effects on you, it just at least gives you the information, and then you can choose to do whatever you want to do with it, right?
Well, for kids, as the perception of the dangerousness of a drug goes down, its use goes up. And if you smoke pot as a teenager, it increases your risk of anxiety, depression, and suicide in your 20s. Your brain is not finished developing until you're 25. Damaging the white matter in your brain, the highways in your brain, it's just a dumb idea. And alcohol is not a health food. People just don't get that yet. that alcohol damages your brain. It hurts a part of the brain called the cerebellum in the back bottom part of the brain that's your processor. It helps you think quickly. It helps you respond quickly. And when you damage that, you damage your ability to think properly. And, so why do restaurants, before when you sit down for a meal, the first thing they do is they put free bread on the table. Why do they do that? And they offer you alcohol. Why? Because if you eat the bread and drink the alcohol, you'll order dessert. You'll spend significantly more money because both of those things lower your frontal lobes. So the frontal lobes, the front third of your brain, is the most human, thoughtful part of your brain. And if you sort of take that offline, your child begins to make decisions rather than the supervising adult.
Gosh. And what about, too, because, you mentioned the cell phone stuff. That's a huge topic right now, is what all this cell phone use is doing to our brains and that stuff. I mean, is it as bad as people say it is? Is it causing depression and causing anxiety and this over social media usage and likes pouring in and notifications? And I mean, it seems horrible.
It's wearing out your pleasure centers. So you have these two areas in your brain. They're called the nucleus accumbens. Okay. And when we push on those with dopamine, you feel pleasure. You're like, oh, I like that. But by all the notifications and screen time and likes and crazy television shows, it wears that pleasure center out. And it takes more and more to feel anything at all, which then feeds the drug addiction epidemic we have in this country. And there are more people today dying of drug, alcohol, and suicide than at any point in recorded history.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing. You think that, because I've read a couple of books about the correlation with young people, especially young girls, and suicide rates or suicide attempt rates. That's from wearing out the pleasure centers, or that's from the hate and the bad comments and the the lack of social connectivity?
So I think it's all of those things.
Yeah.
It's a combination of the bad food, the nutrient deficiency, and one thing you probably haven't thought of. So 80% of the population is low in vitamin D. And vitamin D we get from the sun. And we evolved or were made in the sun, however you want to look at it. But the dermatologists won. They made us afraid of the sun. So children actually don't go outside anymore unless they have sunscreen on. And because of that, our vitamin D levels have plummeted, which then the incidence of depression, obesity, cancer go up. And no one's thinking about it. And I remember for me, when I decided I had to really get healthy for my brain, I checked my vitamin D level and it was 17, which is normal's 30 to 100. And I live in Southern California where the sun is out like 330 days a year. And I was horrified because I knew the studies, people who are over 40 of their vitamin D level have half the risk of cancer of those who are under 20. And here I am living in Southern California, have a terrible vitamin D because I'm not outside, I'm working all the time. And I start taking 10,000 units of vitamin D every day and my appetite went away because low vitamin D levels cause leptin, the hormone that turns your appetite off. It causes it to become ineffective. And I'm just hungry all the time. And I'm like, oh, so cool not being hungry all the time.
Yeah, gosh. It's amazing how these couple little things cause this chain reaction of negative behaviors that then spiral you further and further.
And then we have this unintended consequence like sunscreen and depression. I mean, who would have ever thought that? Or the other thing that happened at the end of the 1970s is the U.S. government decided to demonize fat. And as they took fat out of our diet, obesity skyrocketed because they replaced it with sugar, which is the real weapon of mass destruction.
I can't believe that happened. What about this? If you could if you could, I don't know how to put it because I don't want to make you like you're some brutal dictator, but you could have it how you want it. Let's say you control how everyone's phones work. What's the proper way to use your smartphones? How much time should you allot 20 minutes a day to check your Instagram and do your fun stuff? How should people be using it, would you say?
So in the end of mental illness, my new book for next year, there's this section, if I was an evil ruler, what would I do to create mental illness?
Yeah.
Well, I had to balance that. With
Okay,
if I
good.
was a good ruler,
Thank you.
what would I do to decrease the incidence of mental illness? And the number one thing, the first thing I would do is I would create a national revolution in brain health. That brain health would be taught in schools, in businesses, in churches, anywhere people gather. That I would get people to become obsessed with loving their brains. And I live in Newport Beach, California, and we have more plastic surgeons than almost anywhere else. I always say we care more about our faces, our boobs, our bellies, and our butts than we do our brain.
Big time.
And so I would start changing that. How's your brain?
Yeah.
And love your brain campaigns. And then I would plant these little tiny habits in people's lives. I work with a guy by the name of BJ Fogg, who's a professor at Stanford in their persuasive tech lab on how people change. And it's like they don't make big changes all at once unless they see their scan, then they get serious. But, you know, the little tiny habit, we worked on this for 6 months. Before you go to eat anything or do anything, you just ask yourself this question that takes you 3 seconds. Is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that with intelligence and love, it will transform your life.
Yeah, that's huge. Another thing too you mentioned that I practice is all of this incoming crazy information. And every single day on the news or once again your notifications or whatever, the world's falling apart, there's a recession, we're about to be in a nuclear war, the president's lost his mind, this, that, whatever. And I feel like people have this pull of like I've talked to friends of mine that are smart young people that feel this need to be informed, as if they're going to walk into a conversation and have nothing to say because they just don't even know what's going on anymore. Is that, I do a thing where I don't have those notifications on. I just turn it off. I even have an affirmation that says I only take in positive and uplifting content and I'm aware of what I consume. Is that also as bad as we think it is? Does it just put you
It's
in
as
that?
bad as we think it is, and it's clickbait.
Yeah.
So why, when all sorts of good news happened today and yesterday, why do they lead with the negative? Because they get more clicks.
Yeah.
They get more eyeballs because we are wired to pay attention to fear and negativity because that's how we survived our early existence on this planet. We needed to be fear-based. We don't need that anymore, but the chronic stress associated with CNN and Fox News and the hateful rhetoric that goes back and forth, it will stress you out and make you sick. And I like an app, it's called Good News Network. And it's just uplifting content that makes my life better. And, you know, as awful as the news will make the world to be, there's so many wonderful stories that we see every day here at Amen Clinics, or I see in my own personal life, that's where I want to focus on, because where you bring your attention will determine how you feel. And so once you optimize the hardware of your soul, which is your brain, you then have to program it right. And so I start every day with another little tiny habit where when my feet hit the floor in the morning, I go, today's going to be a great day. And then my mind finds what I like about the day. I get to see you again. And then I'm just happy because it sets it up for me to be happy. And before I go to bed at night, and I love this because I'm always surprised by what I find. I say a prayer and then I go, what went well today? And then I begin to find things that I hadn't thought about for hours, but were just really good parts of the day. And what that does is it actually sets your dreams up to be happier. And if your dreams are happier, you'll go into a deeper stage of REM sleep, which is the most healing part of sleep.
Yeah. And you even showed in the book a scan, I believe it was a woman you had do it, a scan where she was super grateful and then a scan where she was fearful, and you could see the difference.
It was so interesting.
That is insane.
So it was a psychologist, Noelle Nelson, and when she focused on what she loved about her life, her brain looked very healthy. But when she focused on what she hated about her life, it deactivated her frontal lobe so she wouldn't make good decisions, deactivated her left temporal lobe, so more dark thoughts, and it completely deactivated her cerebellum. So now she's not going to be coordinated. So this is what athletic slumps are about. You think you're going to strike out. Well, you're less coordinated, so you do strike out.
Yeah. Gosh, it's like being able to put a medical scan of what, the same way if you're like, man, you know, I'm a football player and my left knee's acting up, and you can do a scan on it and you can say, okay, this is what we need to fix. You can fix it, it's better. To be able to do that with your brain and your thoughts is just mind-blowing. And I just feel like it's so crazy that people don't think about it that way. They just think your thoughts are you. And that's just how I am. And gratitude, I don't know, that's kind of weird. And this and that, and this is just who I am. The world just sucks, or you know what I mean? Things are just
it's because
bad.
they have their brain could be hurt, but they also have undisciplined thinking.
Yeah.
So I call them ants.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Automatic negative thoughts, the thoughts that come into your mind automatically and ruin your day. And in second grade, they should have taught you not to believe every stupid thing you think. And I wrote a kid's book about this called Captain Snout and the Superpower Questions. I love this book because it teaches kids that their thoughts can help them or their thoughts can hurt them, can punish them, can damage them. And you don't have to believe every stupid thing you think. And I talk about 7 different kinds of ants. There's the all or nothing ant, or the blaming ant, or the mind-reading, fortune-telling ants, or the just the bad ants, where you just focus on what's wrong in a situation and completely ignore all the things that are right. And the exercise, again, it's super simple. Whenever you feel sad or mad or nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking. And just ask yourself, is it true? Can I absolutely know that that thought is true? Like I had a thought, my wife never listens to me. And that's a terrible thought. I mean, when if you don't challenge it, it's an isolating, lonely thought. And it's a thought that would give me permission to be rude to her. And so, but if I recognize it, write it down, Tana never listens to me, is that true? No, that's not true. She's listened to all 14 public television specials I've written the scripts for. But you see, if I don't question my thoughts, I believe them 100%. And then I act as if they're true, which can devastate my work or can devastate my relationships.
Yeah, I feel like learning that skill, and I can't even say it from the position of someone who's learned it. I would say I'm an active student, but is life-changing. Because so much, I mean, how many bad thoughts are acted on, even in subtle ways, even maybe your mood's just messed up, or the way you're treating your friends or your spouse or your whatever. And then it just, like I said, it spirals to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And now you have these sea of problems that really...
And now you want to kill yourself because you can't, or get drunk because you can't turn it off. And the problem is, if you have a lot of ants, they mate with the ants of your partner. And you create mutant ants that devastate the relationship. And it happens in intimate relationships. It happens between parents and children. It happens at work. It happens between friends. I mean, anywhere people are, they're infested if they don't know how to sort of clean them out.
Can you tell me the other thing too? I don't know if you remember without seeing the scan, but there was something else too where I told you that I suffer from, anxiety here and there, and it's gotten significantly better, but it's something that I still want to completely master. And so we really thought that this one area of my brain would be super high energy, a lot going on. after the scan, you saw that it was actually pretty low. It was on the other side. And so what that told you is that had I been given SSRIs or certain medications, it would have actually been really, really bad for me. Because I feel like that's something that happens a lot, right? People go in, they're just kind of
routinely, and not just with psychiatrists.
Yeah.
85% of psychiatric drugs are prescribed by non-psychiatric physicians. Pediatricians, family practice doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants. I mean, if you talk about crazy, that's seriously crazy. And if you have low activity in your frontal lobe or in your temporal lobes, and they put you on the wrong medication, well, it'll actually lower it further and disinhibit you, which can then cause some serious problems.
Yeah. Gosh, that to me was mind-blowing, because I've talked to multiple people who have had trouble with trying to find the right solution, and they go to these doctors and they just get given a new medication every single time. And I know in some ways that can increase suicidal tendencies and it can have devastating effects. But once again, the fact that they just throw guesses at something that can be so damaging blows my mind, When you could look in 2 seconds.
They don't take responsibility when they make them worse. They go, oh, well, maybe you have a personality problem.
Yeah.
And I'm like not okay with this.
Yeah.
It needs to change, which is why I get up every day and why at 65, I mean, I've walked 10,000 steps this morning just because I want to keep myself healthy, because there's so much work to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it blows my mind, the way that we label people in that way. The other thing that was crazy to me from the book was how damaging head trauma really is. And even, you said that a lot of times you'll ask people, have you had any head trauma? And they'll say no. And they'll say no 10 times until finally they say, oh, well, I fell off my bike or something when I was 12, but I wasn't even knocked unconscious or whatever. Not a big deal. And then obviously you talk about NFL players and the damage that you've seen there. And even some of the, I don't want to quote it wrong, but the surveys or whatever, where there was one, I think, in Toronto where 60% of homeless people had head trauma, homeless men. I know that it affects the prison population. Like, this is something that is, once again, not talked about at all, that is causing people to have these horrible outcomes in their lives and don't even know that that's what's
because they don't
fueling it.
look.
Yeah.
So if you just believe that your brain is the supercomputer that runs your life. So if we could just agree, and I think almost all neuroscientists would agree with me, your brain runs everything you do. How you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along with other people. Your brain is the organ of learning, loving, and deciding. And when it works right, you work right. And when it's troubled, you're going to have trouble in your life. So if we just agree on that, your brain, and this is the one that sort of blew my mind, your brain is the consistency of soft butter, tofu, custard, somewhere between egg whites and Jell-O.
That is mind-blowing.
It's housed in a very hard skull that has multiple sharp bony ridges. And right around the area that yours is hurt is a very sharp bony ridge called the lesser wing of the sphenoid bone. And if God would have consulted me, I'm like, you need to put bumper guards on that bone because it causes more havoc, including anxiety issues.
Yeah.
And when I first started looking at scans, I mean, the first year, I'm like, mild traumatic brain injury ruins people's lives. Yeah. And nobody knows about it. And I wrote a column in the local newspaper where I lived at the time in Northern California about suicide and head trauma. And that night that the article came out, it was a Thursday night, I got a call from a distraught mother. And I stayed late that night to see her. And her 19-year-old son had just killed himself. And the story was, he was a great human being, a good student, a good boy, and then had a bicycle accident where his front tire hit the curb and he flipped over. And he was unconscious, but only for about 30 minutes. And so they called it a mild traumatic brain injury. Yeah. But she said he was completely different. He was irritable and aggressive and didn't do well in school and disrespectful that he'd never been. And then She came home after he shot and killed himself, and she was just devastated.
Yeah.
And she goes, "Do you think the head injury had something to do with it?" Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right? And so if people's behavior changes, you have to go, so what happened? Now, everybody's sort of fallen off their bike, but what I've seen is I see the damage on their scans, and I go, "Have you ever had a head injury?" And they go, "No," like you said, 10 times. And then they tell me about going through a windshield of a car.
Yeah.
Or falling out of a second-story window, or one of my NFL players, Marvin Fleming. He played in 5 Super Bowls. He was on the Miami Dolphins' perfect team in 1972. I'm like, "Marvin, did you ever have a brain injury?" He said, "No." And his brain looked terrible. And I'm like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "Nope, never went the wrong way, never lost consciousness." I said, "Well, how about outside of football?" "Nope." And then after the 10th time, he said, "I'm sorry I lied to you." I'm like, "What?" He said, "We were in a Volkswagen." He's 6'7", so just trying to think of him in a Volkswagen Beetle. And they're driving from Utah to California, and they're on a mountain pass. It was snowing out, and they got into an accident in their car. This Beetle fell 150 feet off the cliff to a riverbed below. He was knocked unconscious. They had to drag him out of the car so he wouldn't drown. And I'm just looking up to him. I'm like, "How did you forget that?" That's like relevant.
Gosh, it's mind blowing. What do you think is like the most? Here's the other thing to me is I feel like this mental health discussion is becoming more and more popular, which is great news. But I also still feel like mental health is very wrongly still thought about. Like people still think that means you're crazy. And, "Oh, well, I'm not crazy." And a lot of people don't want to go to therapy, or they don't want to read these types of books or do this type of stuff because I'm not crazy. I'm totally fine. What would you say is the single biggest misconception about mental health and the way that it's perceived? And
So it's the whole reason why I wrote The End of Mental Illness.
Yeah.
And I know that's a bold title, and I've already gotten some grief from my colleagues.
You gotta be bold.
It's not mental. It's brain. And then if you don't get that, you hurt people. So you have to look at it, respect it, treat it right, feed it right, put it in the right environment, and the incidence of anxiety, depression, substance abuse goes down when brain health goes up. The end of mental illness begins with a revolution in brain health. And quite frankly, I've hated the terms mental illness from the time I decided to be a psychiatrist. It just bothered me. Yep. It's stigmatizing, it's hurtful, and nobody wants to see a psychiatrist. And this is probably not politically correct, but I did my child psychiatry training in Hawaii. And Hawaii is an Asian culture. And Asians experience a high level of guilt and shame. And they don't admit that they have mental health issues because that brings shame onto the family. But they will do anything possible to give their children an advantage. So what if we just shifted from mental health to brain health? Have a better brain, you do better in school. Have a better brain, you do better in work. Have a better brain, you're happier. You're more purposeful. You're more connected. Your relationships are better. And so the end of mental illness is we need to end the term mental illness and call these things what they really are, brain health issues that are stealing your mind, and then work on getting your brain right.
Yeah. How does emotional trauma play into that? You can't see that on a scan,
Oh,
right?
we can.
Really?
Yeah, I published a study on 21,000 people looking at the difference between physical trauma and emotional trauma. So looking at traumatic brain injury versus PTSD.
Yeah.
And what we found is when you're emotionally traumatized, it changes your brain. And it actually causes the emotional circuits to become overactive. And it's like they just can't stop working hard.
Yeah.
And where physical trauma, like in your scan, shows decreases.
Yeah.
They're great psychological treatments, like one called EMDR, that helps calm down that emotional brain. I mean, so one tip for your listeners, if you're really upset about something, take 30 seconds, really think about it, and get your eyes going left to right, left to right. So like just a second each time, left to right. And what that does is it calms down the amygdala, the fear center in the brain, and it activates your frontal lobes. And do that up to 6 times for just 30 seconds. So we're talking, 5 minutes max. Yeah. That little exercise, think about the trauma, eyes left to right, left to right, left to right, 30 seconds, and then go, well, how am I feeling about it now? And after 6 times, many people, their worry goes away.
Wow.
Simple. But it's a brain thing, right? And if you don't get it, you could go talk to somebody in therapy. And I'm a huge fan of therapy once your brain works right.
Yeah.
But to go to therapy and do software programming on someone that has hardware issues, I'm not a fan of that because it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, it's going to demoralize the people who go. Yeah. So therapy, as it's currently practiced, virtually 99% of therapists get no training in brain health, which, when you think about it, is insane.
Is there anything that sticks out when I ask what the biggest recovery or turnaround you've ever seen is in your clinic?
Well, I think my favorite story is my nephew's story. I told this at Saddleback Church, and someone anonymously posted a 6.5-minute video, and it got 40 million views and 27,000 comments, and many of them will just make you cry. They're so wonderful.
Holy cow.
And I tell this story. So when I first started scanning people, I got no end of grief from my colleagues. Oh, my goodness. And it was really hard for me at the time because I have these 2 personal flaws. Is one, I like being liked. Mm-hmm. And the second one is I hate conflict. Mm-hmm. And now, because I'm scanning people and my colleagues aren't, I'm not liked and I'm in a fight.
Look
and
how you
I
found
just
yourself.
like, damn it, I didn't like that. It's just not who I am as a human. And then in April 1995, so I'd been scanning people for 4 years, I got a call late night from my sister-in-law who told me my 9-year-old nephew, who's my godson, attacks a little girl on the baseball field for no particular reason. And I'm like, what? And she said, Danny, he's different. He's mean. He doesn't smile anymore. I went into his room today and I found 2 pictures he had drawn. One of them, he was hanging from a tree by a noose. The other picture, he was shooting other children. So Andrew was Columbine or Sandy Hook or Aurora, Colorado, waiting to happen. Yeah. And I want to see him the next day. And they lived 8 hours from me, so they put him in the car and drove him to where I was practicing. And my first thought is I have to scan him because he's got a left temporal lobe problem. Because I'd already correlated that area to these dark thoughts. And then my next thought was, you want to scan everybody. Maybe it's a psychological problem. He's the second son in a Lebanese family, like I am. Yeah. Which gives you your own psychological problems. Yeah. But then, after I did that for about 10 seconds, I'm like, stop it, you have to scan him. And he had a cyst the size of a golf ball occupying the space of his left temporal lobe. God. It's the first time I'd seen that. I've seen it 60 times since. And I called his pediatrician. I said, you find someone to take that out. And he talked to 3 neurologists, all of whom said they wouldn't touch the cyst. And they didn't think the cyst was related to his behavior. Gosh. And they wouldn't operate on him until he had, and here's the quote, real symptoms. And I'm screaming at his pediatrician. I'm like, I have a homicidal, suicidal boy. What do you think real symptoms are? Yeah. And so I dismissed the pediatrician and I called the neurosurgery department at UCLA and I talked to their chief, who said, Dr. Amen, when cysts are symptomatic, we drain them. He's obviously symptomatic. Yeah. And when they drained the cyst, his behavior completely went back to normal. Wow. And last year he got married to a wonderful girl. I mean, now it's 25 years later. Yeah. And, but if I wouldn't have discovered that, he would have been dead in 6 months. And it was that moment that I became a warrior for brain health. It was that moment. It's not mental illness. Yeah. It's brain illness.
Gosh. Okay, how about this for the listeners? And I'll wrap it up. What do you think the number one or 3 or 4 things that listeners can do now to make progress? If they're listening to this and they feel anxious, they feel that, is it practicing the ant technique? Is it like, what would you say? Because, these scans are hard to get. They're expensive. You got to be around, whatever. What can people start to do now to put that into
change your
action?
brain, change your life, or feel better fast and make it last. If you have kids, I have a new book, Change Your Brain, Change Your Grades. I mean, those are like simple things to do. And a long time ago, I realized not everybody's getting a scan. Mm-hmm. So based on thousands, I created a questionnaire. It's free online. Go to brainhealthassessment.com, brainhealthassessment.com. It'll tell you which of the 16 brain types you have and what are some supplements that might be helpful for you. You can start with that one little question I said, is this good for my brain or bad for it? Yeah. And you need to know the lists. And most people would sort of get it. Yeah. Gluten's really not good for your brain. Sugar's bad for your brain. Anything that damages your gut damages your brain because your gut is sort of like the gatekeeper for your body. And it's why you shouldn't drink, because alcohol kills bugs. Well, you have 100 trillion of those suckers in your gut that make neurotransmitters, that make vitamins, that digest your food, that detoxify your body. You should be protecting your gut. Start the day with every day is going to be a great day, and finish it with what went well today. And do whatever you can to teach your children about brain health, because every day you are modeling brain health or brain illness.
Yep. And what if people hear this and say, I need to get a scan, like how I did. I'm going to find any way. I need to get one of these scans. How do you go about making
So we have
that?
8 clinics around the United States.
Yeah.
We have 4 on the West Coast, 1 in Chicago, 3 on the East Coast. They can go to Amen Clinic. So Amen, like the last word in a prayer. Imagine growing up with that last name. AmenClinics.com. And we would love to see them.
Yeah. And can you get them, like if you live in, like I'm from Ohio, if you live there, can you get them at a hospital and send it to the clinic or no?
It doesn't work very well because that's not what they're used to doing.
Yeah.
It's better if they can, come to one of the clinics. It's why we have them scattered throughout the United States.
Yeah. Okay, here's my final 2 questions. If you could hop in a time machine and go anywhere in your own life and tell yourself anything, where would you go and what would you say?
Well, I would go 30 years from now because I'm just dying to see, if this, if we made our dent in the universe and this is standard practice for people with brain health, mental health issues. And I'd be a cheerleader.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good. You're the only person that's ever said you'd go forward.
Well, it's interesting when people do timeline therapy. I don't know if you know about timeline therapy, but it's basically how you see your life. Yeah. A lot of people see their past in front of them, which really can hurt them.
Yeah.
And for me, I always see my past behind me because I'm like really curious about what's in front.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, last one. This is kind of like what I asked about the phone thing, but this is probably right in line with your new book. If you could prescribe anything to the entire world for 30 days and everyone has to do it, what do we tell them to do?
We do brain health education for 30 days.
Yeah.
And I have a program called Brain Thrive by 25 that I'd have all kids take. And at Amen University, we have another program called the Brain Warriors Way. Yeah. And they're 26 lessons. I just have you do a lesson a day. And by the end, you're in love with your brain doing the right thing.
Yeah. Awesome. Listen, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough not only for doing the pod, but for the work you're doing. And I know the way you describe it and the way you write about it, in the beginning, it must have been kind of scary, especially for a guy who doesn't like conflict. But man, is it like, for someone like me who just cracked open this book and had this thing in the back of my head, I did have this injury, I want to have a little bit of anxiety, it opened me up to a whole new lane. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Guys, if you like that and you want to see more like it, as well as vlogs, other web series, and all the random stuff that I'm doing here on YouTube, don't forget to click that subscribe button. You won't regret it, I promise.